The neon sign of the Starlight Motel flickered in the distance, its blue and red glow cutting through the hazy summer night. I'd been driving for hours, my thoughts as jumbled as the radio stations that faded in and out as I crossed county lines. This wasn't a planned stop. Nothing about this trip was planned. I just needed to get away, to escape the suffocating expectations back home, the constant questions about my future, about girlfriends, about why I always seemed so distant at family gatherings. The truth was, I had been running from myself for years, and somehow, this decrepit motel on the outskirts of a town whose name I'd already forgotten seemed like as good a place as any to stop running, if only for a night. The motel was exactly what you'd expect: faded carpet that might have been green once, wallpaper peeling at the corners, and a distinct smell of cigarettes masked by cheap air freshener. The night clerk barely looked up from his magazine as he slid me the key to room 17. "Ice machine's broken in the main building," he muttered. "There's another one in the annex past the pool if you need it." I nodded, though ice was the last thing on my mind. Room 17 was at the far end of the complex, away from the few other cars in the parking lot. I dropped my duffel bag on the bed and sat down, the springs protesting beneath my weight. The silence was almost oppressive after hours of highway noise. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own thoughts too clearly. I needed a distraction. That's when I remembered the ice. Not that I needed it, but suddenly the idea of a simple task, a brief walk, seemed appealing. I grabbed the plastic bucket from the bathroom counter and stepped back into the night. The pool was empty, of course, a rectangle of murky water surrounded by a chain-link fence. Beyond it stood a smaller building, presumably the annex the clerk had mentioned. The door was propped open with a brick, and I stepped inside, finding myself in a narrow hallway with rooms on either side. At the end, a small sign indicated the ice room. The ice room was empty, not just of people, but of ice. The machine stood silent, its metal face dark and uninviting. I was about to turn around when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find myself face to face with a man I hadn't noticed before. He must have been in one of the annex rooms, though I hadn't seen any lights on when I walked by. He was taller than me by a few inches, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that seemed both careless and deliberate. His eyes were the kind of blue that's almost startling, the kind you notice immediately and can't look away from. He wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, but somehow managed to make them look like they'd been tailored specifically for his lean frame. "Ice machine's been out for days," he said, his voice deeper than I expected, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "They never fix anything around here." I nodded, suddenly aware of how empty the building was, how isolated we were from the main complex. "The clerk should have mentioned that," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "The clerk doesn't care," he replied with a half-smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, almost mischievous. "No one does. That's why people come to places like this." There was something in the way he said it, a knowing tone, an implication, that made my heart rate quicken. I should have felt threatened, perhaps, but instead I felt a strange pull, a curiosity that overrode my usual caution. "I'm just passing through," I said, though he hadn't asked. "Aren't we all?" His eyes never left mine as he stepped closer. "I'm Alex." "Michael," I replied, though I rarely used my full name. It felt right in that moment, as if I was stepping into a different version of myself. Alex glanced at the ice bucket in my hand and smiled again. "Looking for ice in an empty room. There's something poetic about that." He nodded toward a door at the back of the room, one I hadn't noticed before. "There's a freezer back there. Old maintenance closet they converted. Sometimes there are bags of ice left in it." I hesitated, my instincts finally catching up with the situation. I was alone with a stranger in an empty building, considering following him into an even more isolated space. Every warning I'd ever heard screamed in my head. But there was something else too, a different kind of warning, or perhaps an invitation. The way Alex looked at me wasn't threatening, it was recognizing, as if he saw something in me that I'd been trying to hide, even from myself. Before I could decide, Alex moved past me toward the door. "Come on," he said, not looking back to see if I followed. And somehow, that made it easier to follow him. The maintenance closet was small, barely big enough for the two of us, and the chest freezer that hummed against the back wall. The space was illuminated by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across Alex's face as he lifted the freezer lid. "Empty," he said, but he didn't sound disappointed. He let the lid fall closed with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the confined space. When he turned to face me, we were standing closer than before, the narrow room leaving little space between us. I should have stepped back, made some excuse, and returned to my room. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But sensible had never led me anywhere worth going. "You're not really here for ice," Alex said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed hard. "I don't know why I'm here." "I think you do." His voice was softer now, almost gentle. "Sometimes we end up exactly where we need to be, even when we don't know we're looking for it." The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with something I'd spent years pretending not to understand. Alex took a step forward, and I found myself backed against the freezer door, its cold surface seeping through my thin t-shirt. "I've seen that look before," he said. "In my own mirror. That look of wanting something so badly but being terrified of it at the same time." I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. This moment, this exact moment, was everything I'd feared and secretly hoped for. Alex reached out slowly, giving me every chance to move away, to stop what was happening. But I remained frozen, not from fear but from a desperate need to see what would happen next. His hand came to rest on my shoulder, warm and solid. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, "and I will." The words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "Don't stop." What happened next was both a blur and crystal clear in my memory. Alex pushed me gently back against the freezer door, his body pressing against mine, his breath warm on my face. And then his lips were on mine, hesitant at first, then more insistent as I responded. The contrast was electric, the freezing metal at my back and the heat of another person against my chest, my lips, my neck. It was as if everything cold inside me began to thaw, years of denial and fear melting away under his touch. I had kissed before, awkward encounters with girls at high school parties, always feeling like I was playing a part in someone else's script. This was different. This felt real, authentic in a way nothing had before. My hands, which had been at my sides, found their way to Alex's waist, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, I felt dizzy with the rush of it all. Alex rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "I've been watching you since you checked in," he admitted. "The way you carried yourself, like you were trying to take up as little space as possible. I recognized it because I used to be the same way." "Used to be?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He opened his eyes, meeting mine with a gaze so direct it almost hurt to maintain. "At some point, you have to decide if you're going to live your life for others or for yourself. I made my choice a long time ago. In that small, cold room, with this stranger who somehow seemed to know me better than the people I'd known all my life, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just about physical attraction or the thrill of a forbidden encounter. It was about recognition, seeing a version of myself I could become if I had the courage." Alex stepped back slightly, giving me space. "We can go back to our separate rooms right now, and tomorrow you can continue your journey as if this never happened. Or, the question hung between us, full of possibility. Or you can come back to my room, and we can talk. Really talk. And see where that leads." It wasn't what I expected him to say. The offer of conversation rather than just physical connection surprised me, made this moment feel even more significant. "I'd like that," I said and meant it. Alex's room was similar to mine, but somehow felt different, perhaps because of the few personal touches he'd added. A book on the nightstand, a leather jacket hung carefully over the chair, a bottle of decent whiskey on the dresser. He poured us each a small glass, and we sat on the edge of the bed, not touching but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. We talked for hours. About growing up in small towns where difference was viewed with suspicion. About families who loved conditionally, even when they claimed otherwise. About the exhaustion of pretending to be someone you're not. Alex had 5 years on me and the confidence that came with acceptance, both from others and, more importantly, from himself. "The hardest part isn't other people," he told me, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It's the voice in your own head telling you there's something wrong with you. Once you silence that voice, the rest gets easier. Not easy, but easier." As the night deepened, our conversation became more personal, more intimate. The space between us on the bed gradually disappeared, a hand on an arm to emphasize a point. knees touching as we turned to face each other. The casual brush of fingers as we passed the bottle back and forth. And then we were kissing again, but slower this time, with purpose rather than urgency. What followed was a revelation, not just the physical act, which was new to me, but the emotional connection that came with it. For the first time, I felt present in my own body, fully aligned with my desires instead of fighting against them. Afterward, lying beside Alex in the dim light of the bedside lamp, I felt a strange mixture of peace and exhilaration. The world outside hadn't changed, but my place in it had shifted somehow. What happens now? I asked, watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly above us. Alex propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me with those intense blue eyes. Now you have a choice. You can treat this as a one-time thing, a momentary lapse in an otherwise straight life. Plenty of guys do. Or you can recognize it for what it is, a part of yourself you've been denying. Is there a middle option? I asked, only half joking. He smiled, but there was a seriousness behind it. The middle option is the hardest, living in between, never fully committing to either path. That's where most of the pain comes from. I knew he was right. The years of uncertainty, of trying to convince myself I could be what others wanted, had taken a toll I was only now beginning to understand. I don't know if I'm brave enough, I admitted, to be like you. Alex's hand found mine under the sheets, his fingers intertwining with mine. Courage isn't something you either have or don't have. It's a muscle you build over time, decision by decision. We fell asleep like that, hands linked, and when I woke in the early hours of the morning, I carefully extracted myself without waking him. Back in my own room, I showered and packed my few belongings, my mind racing with everything that had happened, everything that had been said. By the time I checked out, the morning sun was just beginning to rise, painting the dingy motel in shades of gold and pink that made it almost beautiful. I looked toward the annex, wondering if Alex was still asleep, if he would wonder where I'd gone when he woke. I sat in my car for a long time, key in the ignition but the engine silent. I could drive away now, continue my aimless journey, and file last night away as an experience, an experiment, a story I'd never tell anyone. Or I could stay, not forever, but long enough to explore this new territory, this version of myself that had emerged in a rundown motel ice room. In the end, I did neither. I took out a pen and the motel notepad I'd slipped into my pocket, and I wrote down my phone number and a simple message. Thank you for helping me melt. Call me if you want to talk more. Michael. I folded the note and walked back to the front desk, asking the morning clerk, a different person from the night before, to deliver it to room 23 in the annex. Then I got in my car and drove, not away from what had happened, but towards something new, carrying the experience with me like a compass pointing toward a more authentic life. That was 3 years ago. Alex and I didn't end up together. Our lives were heading in different directions, and what we shared was more about transformation than long-term connection. But we did stay in touch, becoming friends who shared a significant moment that changed both our trajectories. As for me, I stopped running. I went back home eventually, not to live, but to be honest with my family about who I am. Some relationships strengthened, others fractured. I lost friends I thought would be lifelong, and gained new ones who loved me for my authenticity rather than my performance. I think often about that night in the motel, about the empty ice room and the freezer door against my back, about how sometimes the coldest places can lead to the warmest revelations, about how being pushed, whether by another person or by circumstance, can be exactly what we need to break free from the prisons we build for ourselves. The metaphor isn't lost on me, how I was frozen for so long, rigid in my denial, until someone saw through the ice to the person trapped beneath. How in that small maintenance closet, pressed against a freezer, I began to thaw, to become fluid, to flow toward a life that felt like my own. We all have our ice rooms, the places where we confront our deepest fears and desires. And we all need someone, sometimes a stranger, to push us toward the freezer door, to help us melt away the protective layers we've built around our truest selves. I don't know where Alex is now. Our communication has dwindled to occasional messages on birthdays and holidays. But wherever he is, I hope he knows that in that rundown motel, in that empty ice room, he didn't just give me a night to remember. He gave me permission to become myself. And in doing so, He helped me understand that the most important journeys aren't the ones we take on highways and backroads, but the ones that lead us back to ourselves, to the people we were always meant to be. Sometimes I still dream about that night, the neon lights, the humming freezer, the feeling of finally letting go of a breath I'd been holding for years. In my dreams, I'm always standing at a threshold, a door between what was and what could be. And I'm no longer afraid to step through. The ice room was empty, but I was filled with possibility. He pushed me to the freezer door and melted me. And in melting, I found my true shape, my true self, flowing forward into a life I could finally call my own. Total _char_count, 18,256.